Hey guys, and thank you for joining me today for this episode of Dynamo BIM. Today, I'm actually going to be utilizing Dynamo to essentially outsmart view filters in Revit. Now, we all know Revit has its limitations, and I've had quite a few users come to me that basically say, I want to use view filters in a way that Revit won't let me. So let me show you what I mean. Go ahead and share my screen here. Good old sample file within Revit, all familiar with this guy, right? So essentially, what I've done within this file is I've went ahead and set up an existing, well, I should say a pre-existing phase, and I went ahead and started to set some elements to these phases, in particular some walls. Which I'm going to be playing with today. So you can see here, if I select this wall, it's on the pre-existing phase. Maybe this curtain wall is on the existing phase, etc. However, if I go into the visibility graphics of this view and I look at filters and I go to add a filter and edit new to create one, and I create one, and I'll just call it outsmarting. I want to look at walls. You'll see here that phases aren't a parameter that I can create a view filter by. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? Revit has its own settings for phase filters. Okay, so let me show you what that is. So if I look at the manage and I look at phases, the same spot that I was when I set up the pre-existing phase, you'll see that there's phase filters. So essentially, based off of the view settings and the elements visible within that view, Revit will automatically show elements based off of their phase. Okay, so if you're looking at a new construction phase and you have existing elements, they're going to look a certain way, etc., right? And so this is, once again, all tied to the phasing of the actual view. And then, of course, it picks up the phased elements. Now, one thing that you can see in here is that it bunches all of my existing elements. I can't say, look at one existing phase or look at one phase of elements that's existing and categorize it or view it this way, change its graphics. Okay, and sometimes we need to know what phase was that element created, even if it's just for a visual cue for you as a designer to be able to know when that element was created. Okay, so essentially what we're going to do is we're going to utilize Dynamo. Now, one little tricky thing about this particular Dynamo workflow, unlike a lot of typical get parameter, set parameter type of scripts, this value isn't what's referred to as a string. It's not just characters. This itself, this value, is an element within Revit. It has its own ID, etc. So to be able to get that parameter and set it essentially to a parameter that we can create a view filter with, like comments, for example, we're going to have to understand the element name of this element value. Okay, rather than if I just look for the wall mark, which in fact is a string value, it's just an assemblance of characters, right? The phase is not just going to report pre-existing. It's actually going to report a Revit element with a Revit ID, which we'll see in Dynamo. But essentially, once I get that name of this element, in this case, pre-existing, what I want to do is I just want to copy that name to, let's just say, a parameter like comments, which if I look in visibility graphics under filters, I go to add one. Once again, I'll call it outsmarting. I probably should have saved this because now it's outsmarting me, right? Slowing me down here. You can see here that I can create a view filter based off comments, right? So if I come in here and I say it equals pre-existing, once I start to add elements, that essentially have that comment of pre-existing, which I could do manually, right? But of course I don't want to, especially when I have thousands of elements that are updating on the fly. So I can come in here and I can change maybe the pattern. Actually, I guess I'd want to do the cut pattern because I'm in a plan, right? To be maybe a solid red. So it's really, really obvious when the pre-existing elements are. And I should probably go ahead and be smart. I'll call this walls phase created comments pre-existing. Now, I know this seems really long, but essentially I'm going to populate the phase created information into the comment parameter. So that's actually the parameter that I'm looking at. But the data is the phase created data. And this specific view filter is looking at pre-existing, right? So I can actually just copy all of this information now that I have that set up, create a new one. I guess I could duplicate this and edit it and call this one just existing. And so now I'll have two filters, one that looks at my pre-existing elements and one that looks at my existing elements. Okay. So named extremely clear. Everybody on my team is going to know exactly what I'm doing here. Okay. I'm looking at the phase information in the comment parameter for the existing and pre-existing. So now that I've created those, I can go ahead and add the existing guy here, and maybe I'll turn those, let's say purple, right? Once again, just something super obvious so that I can see it. So the cut patterns of my pre-existing will be red, and the cut patterns of my existing will be purple. Now, once again, nothing happens right now, because if I look at my wall schedule, for example, none of my comment values are populated, right? But if I just go ahead and, for the sake of being manual here and showing you, right, which you could 100% do this all manually, right? But if I look now here on my floor plan, I should have at least one red wall and one purple wall, right? So we can start to see those filters come into play because once again, my comment data is populated. Okay, so essentially I'm tricking Revit with saying, look at the pre-existing information, look at the existing information, and show that data based off of its comments, right? And just for the sake of, I might actually need to override some other things like curtain wall things and curtain wall booleans and different things like that to truly get the graphics associated to this. But that's not a problem, right? So this one's pre-existing. So I'll just go ahead and just for the sake of this filter here so that we can start to see some different things show up. But once again, we want all of these to show up, right? So let's make sure that my existing phase filter is going to be applied properly. So this should actually be purple now, right? But when I run the Dynamo script, this should switch back to red because it's going to, once again, copy this value, which is essentially the element name of this phase, into my comments. So let's do it. Open up Dynamo here, start a new graph. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is the same thing that I would do with a schedule in Revit, right? If I go to create a schedule, what does it ask me to do? It asks me to look at elements based off of their category. So same kind of thought process when I'm in Dynamo. I want to look at categories, right? And you can see there, I just right-clicked in my canvas and started typing. It allows me to search by right-clicking. So it allows me to come in here and specify my category. So this is a drop-down list, nice little list here. So I can come in here and I can say, I want walls. Notice also that when you start a graph, a new one, by default, it automatically is going to run. So that is something that you will want to note, that this is going to populate data on the fly. All right. So now that I have my category of walls, I need, once again, right click on my canvas here, all elements of that category, just like a schedule would show, right? I'm getting the category, and then the schedule is showing me all of the elements within my model of that category. So you can see down here at the very bottom, all elements of category. I'm going to wire my category to my category. And you can see here, this starts to give me a list of my walls. And I can actually see this list by kind of just hovering over the node. It gives me this little pin icon, and I can click that and the list will stay. So if I add walls, remove walls, while this is automatic, this list will dynamically change. You can see here that I have 210 walls in the sample model currently. So now I want to look at a parameter of these walls, right? Just like you would in a schedule, right? When I come in and I look at schedule, right, with walls and I hit OK, I want to look at the fields. So essentially, I want to get a parameter value of this element. Excuse me. So what I'm going to do, and this is actually kind of tricky. Unfortunately, the searching mechanisms in Dynamo aren't the greatest, but a little trick here. If I type in elements, because that's what I'm actually searching for, I want to get properties of the elements. So I'm going to hit elements dot, a little bit of coding language. I am not a coder. You can watch my videos of learning Python with Asan and see me struggle with that very, very much. But these are just some little tips that I've learned along the way that I'm going to share with you. So elements dot get space parameter, right? So just kind of typing this out here. Maybe it doesn't want a space. So get parameter, and actually I messed up here. Sorry, I typed in elements. It's element dot get parameter value by name. And of course, I can never really type these very accurately. So you can see here, it gets very finicky in terms of this searching here, but you can see element dot get param allows me to get parameter value by name. I know, not the most intuitive thing, but these are just the types of things, just like within Revit, you start to learn along the way, right? Those types of things that just become muscle memory, if you will. So I'm going to plug my elements into my element, and this is okay. It will actually take a list of elements just like this is. Notice my list always starts at 0. And I want to put in my parameter name. Now, as I mentioned before, parameter values a lot of times are string values, which is essentially just characters, right? Like the door mark or the wall mark, right? That can be letters and numbers combined together. This, as you can see when I hover over it, is also looking for a string. The name of the parameter whose value you want to obtain. String. So if I right click on my canvas and I type in string, right, because that's essentially what that node is telling me what it needs, I can then type in the name of the value that this parameter is. Okay, so I can come in here and I can write in exactly as is in Revit, phase created. Case sensitive, everything matters. So I'm going to plug that value into my parameter name. And you can see there, I get my list of phases. And once again, you can see it doesn't say existing, pre-existing, new construction. It's actually reporting an element, just like the wall is an element. It itself has its own element ID, right? You can see similar element IDs, right? 86961, 86961, 12, very similar ones because there's only 3. There's new construction, existing, and pre-existing. Now, I will say, down at the very bottom, there are ones that have no value. Little trick here. Maybe throw in the comments if you knew before I tell you why there are walls with no phase. These are actually infill walls. So because I went ahead and so your sample file will actually be different than mine. This wall here is this door is a new construction door fit into a pre-existing wall. Therefore, this piece of the wall here doesn't even have a phase property. It's an infill wall. So those are those walls that are being reported. And these are the quirks that we have to work with Dynamo and just the Revit API in general. Okay. So that's all right. We're going to have a little bit of a warning when it comes down to getting some of these names, but that's all right. We'll deal with it. So with that being said, now we essentially want to get the name of these phases. So kind of like how this is element get parameter value by name, I'm going to right click to search and type in element dot name because I'm getting the name of elements. And you can see there, get the name of the element. So I'll type in this variable to my element and you'll see it gives me my values, but it's scary, right? It provides this yellow node with a warning on top and it says ask to convert non-convertible types. I have no idea what that means. But we know at the very bottom here, there essentially are elements that do not have a value. So if I look down here at the very bottom, there are nulls. Okay. Now, a little bit of a more advanced tip, if you will. We want to replace these null values so that if there isn't a phase for these walls, and actually if I look at my wall schedule and look down here at the very bottom, you can see those walls, they do schedule. I just want to report back in the column for comments or the parameter comments, none, right? There is no phase here. So it's not just blank. It's a little bit ambiguous when it's blank. Like, what is that? What does that mean? So what I want to do is I want to right click, I'm going to search replace by condition. And essentially what I'm doing here is I'm going to replace these items with, actually I'm not going to do that. That's a little bit more advanced than I want to go. I'll use a string. Hopefully this works as none. Don't give me an error here. So I'm going to replace those with none if the condition is null. Okay, so a little bit of a pro tip, a little bit more advanced than probably some of you may be at within Dynamo, but that's okay. So now if we look down here at the bottom here, all of those null values that were being reported are now being reported as none because their condition was null. So a little bit of a tricky thing here, but you know, very, very useful. I use this very often. These three combination of nodes, the string to tell it, you know, the list what to replace it with, and the object is null, replaced by condition. Okay, so now essentially we have all of the values that we need. We have all of our phase names, right? And if there isn't a phase name, we've reported it as none. So it still reports something, right? So now I can go ahead and I can set these values to a parameter of these elements that can be filtered, like comments, okay? Excuse me. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move up my elements here because I need to hook to those. I still need to hook to my elements to do something to them. I want to update these elements, okay? So just like when I got the parameter value by name, I'm going to right click and I'm going to do element dot set parameter value by name. Let's see if it wants to come up here. There we go. So set one of the elements parameters. So you can see here, it actually gives me 3 input values, right? The values, right? So here I'm going to input the values that I want to set to these elements. And I'll use a string once again. Just go ahead and copy this. And just like in Revit, if I select a node and I hold copy and I drag, it will allow me to copy that node. Or of course I can do Control C. Okay, I use that pretty often, the control drag. And I want to update comments. So I will go ahead and wire this to that. Now, one thing before I do that, you need to note this script is set to automatic. So once I do that, all of my walls comments will get updated, right? So hopefully, some of these, the ones that are actually wrong, should actually, like this one, update to be right, and everything else should follow suit, including the ones that don't have a parameter value of a phase created. Those will get none, right? So what I'm going to do before I run this is I'm actually going to toggle this to manual. So now I can tell Dynamo when to run. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead, wire my comments into my parameter name, and now I'm all good to go. Okay, so let's go through this logic before we run it again. I've gotten all of my walls, right? I got the category walls, and I got all of the elements of that category. I got the parameter phase created, then the name of that phase, right? Because once again, phases report as an element within Revit. The ones that do not have a phase report as null with their name. So I went ahead and replaced the null values with none. And then I'm going to go ahead and set those values back to my wall elements to the parameter of comments. All right, so let's go ahead and click run. Note, it takes a second. It's updating all 210 of those walls, but it's done. So now when I go back into my Revit schedule here, you'll see all of my values have been updated. And if I look back at my floor plan, I should see a bit more color, right? Don't need to save this quite yet. All righty, so I'm seeing quite a bit more color. And once again, I probably would need to update some mullions and curtain wall panels in addition, right? Because unfortunately, the wall isn't really showing anything graphically in terms of the curtain wall. So let's do that. Let's update the curtain wall panels. So I'll add that to my filter first. I'll come in here, edit this guy, add in my curtain wall panels. I guess I went too far here. Curtain panels. And to this guy here, just go ahead and add it to both. Curtain panels. Okay, so got both of those. And now what I can do is within my Dynamo script, I can just go ahead and toggle this. Let's see if it works. It's a real test here. So go up to curtain wall panels in the categories, curtain panels. So it's going to get all of the curtain panels, get their phase, their name, replace the nulls, and set it back to comments. So we'll run it, see what happens. It may not work as well as we think it does because the element itself actually may not have a phase. It's actually reporting something different, but it looks like it works there. So the existing comment got updated, and you can see some of my purple values there for the mullion even worked. So there we go. And one way that we can see that that worked within Dynamo here is you can see that it reports the panels, it reports their phase, just like the wall did. It reports all of the phasing information, replaces anything that would be null, which in this case there aren't any, and then reports those values back to the comments of the curtain wall panel. Good to go. All right, that is this episode of Dynamo BIM, updating or outsmarting your view filters using Dynamo. Hopefully you found this useful. I will definitely share this script with you within the comments. You'll see where that is located. I hope that you can use this in your day-to-day. Please share in the comments if you maybe use a similar type of script or maybe you would have done it differently. Thank you guys.